people know the comic strip.
This is a showcase club.
This is your comedy gymnasium.
This is where I went to college.
It was very, very much family.
The comic strip was our Cheers.
It was totally the place where you came at the end of the night.
You ain't hip if you ain't at the strip.
So this is a world-famous comic strip club.
The strip was a great incubator for talent. Seinfeld honed his act at the strip. Larry Miller, Paul Reiser, George Wallace.
We were riding the next wave of the future comedians, the guys that were going to be the biggest comedians in the country.
When I first started, there were two clubs in New York. There was the Historic Improv on the West Side, and Catch a Rising Star was on the Upper East Side.
An analogy would be the Improv, Bud Friedman's Improv. Bud Friedman was Hugh Hefner, and that was Playboy. Catch a Rising Star was Penthouse. It came later in the 70s. It was a copy, but it had its own different flavor, as did the comic strip, which came a little after Catch. That would be Hustler. Yes, Hustler, but I like Hustler.
The comic strip was actually the stepchild. It was the redheaded stepchild.
The three owners of the place, Richie and Bob and John, saw how well Catch a Rising Star was doing. Went, wait a minute, they're turning people away. Why don't we open up around the corner and let's do the same thing?
Because there were so many acts that couldn't get on.
What I did was I went to all the clubs and got all the talent who couldn't get on at the other two clubs.
The Improv and Catch were doing so well that the comic strip and other clubs were opening up around the city.
It's important to get on these clubs and get in the good graces of the owners of these clubs, as it was to get on the Tonight Show.
The Improv and Catch a Rising Star and the comic strip, which came along after the other two, were really the nexus of an entire movement in comedy.
I think those three clubs definitely kind of set the standard for what would become the modern comedy club.
The 60s were still reverberating throughout the 70s, and I think that was reflected in the way stand-up kind of slowly took over the world.
We were coming out of a time that was awful in the country, and people really needed to laugh, and it just hit.
This stage was the hottest place in the city.
Everybody was high on comedy.
And comedy was the new rock and roll, and comedians were the new rock stars.
If you could kill at the comic strip, then you could pretty much headline any comedy club.
It was Cheers, where everybody knows your name.
It was a great life, and we're making $9 a week, but we were like, this is the greatest thing.
Would you welcome him, please? Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry?
Why do people think that sounds like me? He doesn't sound anything like me.
Jerry, I think, was one of the very first people to go into the comic strip. By the time I got there in '77, he was he was the MC, and you really had the responsibility of running the show.
Once guys like Jerry passed, they were the ones who actually conducted the auditions. So they would bring people up, and they actually were given the power to say, you can work here, you can't.
I still remember the date because it was September 5th, 1977. A guy named Jerry Seinfeld was the MC, and we passed the audition.
It was Carol Leifer, myself, and Rich Hall. And we all like, oh, we were like the graduating class of Wednesday.
Jerry still calls it the trilogy of new regulars.
Whenever people talk about going out, this is what they're talking about. This is that hour thing. Tomorrow people say, where were you last night? You can go, I was out.
You know, I dated Paul, and then I started dating Jerry.
She dated Jerry, and then I dated Jerry, which was it's very seldom spoken about.
He's not talking about me.
There's a new kid. His name is Eddie Murphy. Watch for him.
James Brown been singing for 20 years. I don't know what the fuck James is talking about.
There was this myth about, oh, there's this kid, Eddie Murphy, he's 16, he's so funny.
Oh, Sherman.
Everything about the comic strip was Eddie Murphy.
Bob and Richie were handling Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy was a huge star.
They just picked up and they went to Los Angeles.
Bob and I went off to manage Eddie. Needless to say, Eddie was very successful.
You know, he came out of the comic strip, and here he is like a superstar.
He was the biggest star in this country.
When you have a client like Eddie, and who was, you know, the superstar of the time, there wasn't much time for anything else.
There's no question that Eddie Murphy put the comic strip on the map. When it became clear that any given night Eddie Murphy would show up and tear the walls off the place, it became the, you know, hot club to be at.
I look up in the air, there's a bunch of old white ladies. They'll get on the phone, they'll dial 9-1 and just wait for me to do something.
The night Chris Rock met Eddie Murphy, he was the substitute that night.
He probably found out about Chris the same way I found out about him. Brothers ask about brothers.
He was was just this little puny kid. He was like 18 years old. You know, it was like this, who's this little shit?
Chris Rock had this material that Eddie Murphy goes, this guy's good. He made his dream. He's like, he put him in his movie right then. Chris Rock had the stuff to do it, you know?
Knowing Eddie Murphy was the biggest star on the planet, and Richie was managing him, and then Chrissy was performing at the club that Richie owned, and they all was there. It was like, it seemed like you turned to a channel and you walked inside the TV.
I want you to marry a girl who has the same belief as the family. I said, Dad, why should I marry a girl who thinks I'm a schmuck?
Adam Sandler came out of the Strip. Very nice guy. I didn't understand what he was doing up there.
Adam Sandler, I thought, would never make it. He didn't have material. He had the cute factor.
I remember watching Adam Sandler going, this guy's funny, but he's not going anywhere.
Who would think that 35 years later the Strip would be standing?
To this day, it is still the best room in the world.
There's a wealth of talent in this club, so my feeling is because there's a wealth of it here, Bob and I have now gone back into management.
Richie and I are presently managing 3 of the acts.
Big hand.
Richie would point to me and go, she's Eddie Murphy. And I go, no, Richie, stop. I'm not.
We have as much faith in her as we had with Eddie.
I'm no Eddie Murphy. They knew what they were doing with him, and on some level they must know what they're doing with me.
For me, it comes down to the fact that I want to show that I can do it again. It's as much about that as anything else.
I don't think anybody would have thought that this was the club that would have remained open.
When you killed this club, to this day, I don't think I've ever had that feel. When it bounces off the walls in here, nothing like it.
There's no drug on this earth, there's no love you will get that will feel like killing at the comic strip, and that is true to this day.
We're just these guys, I mean, literally doing it for the love completely.
The fact that we have survived, and improv is no more in this town, and nor is Catch a Rising Star in this town.
They're just things that are legendary institutions of comedy. The comic strip is one of them.
35 years is a hell of a long time.
I love this club. Spent my life